From the soaring highs of King Charles's coronation to the stomach-turning lows following Prince Harry's book Spare, 2023 has been a real rollercoaster for the royal family. Join us as we look back at the year, both good and bad. Hello, happy Christmas and welcome to a special festive edition of Palace Confidential. I'm joined by two people our regular viewers will know very well. The Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Sparkling and fabulous today. We're dressed for the occasion.
Just thought we'd throw on these old things, didn't we, Richard?
Very special. Now, just quickly, our usual reminder that if you don't already, why don't you give yourself a big old Christmas treat and press the subscribe button on our Daily Mail Royals channel. That way you won't miss another episode. Can you imagine the horror? The horror. Well, anyway, as advertised at the top of the show, this episode is a chance for our experts to reflect on some of the biggest royal stories and maybe see if their opinions have changed on them at all. We'll come to the lows in a few minutes, but I think it's right that we start with one of the highs, right? And Rebecca, there really is only one place to start, and that's the coronation. That was not only about setting the tone for the year, but also for the King's monarchy.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much going on this year. You almost forget that in the middle of everything, there was this historic coronation, the first time that we've had a head of state accede to the throne in 70 years, and all the pomp and the ceremony and the pageantry that went with that. And I think it was such a kind of magnificently uplifting occasion. Very different, obviously, from the late Queen's, but I think one that married modern monarchy with the tradition and the history that we expect to be recognised as well. It was a really honour to be part of something so historic, something so special.
It's incredible that you got to be there. And Richard, there were a lot of nerves, weren't there, about whether everything was ready or whether it would be too modern or too stuffy and steeped in tradition. But a few months on, it feels like pretty much general consensus is that it was a success.
I think there really was, and you know, in the build-up to the coronation, you had Republican groups hoping that it would be a great chance for them. They were planning protests. There was worries about security, and there was also the sort of, I think, you know, how many people would turn up? What sort of reaction would there be? I think, you know, King Charles has spent decades sort of preparing, but he never really knew what to expect. But, you know, I remember from being there and meeting the crowds on the day.
Oh, yes, we sent you out to do Vox Pops,
Yeah,
didn't we?
I went out to people and it was fantastic. And the thing was, lots of people couldn't even get there because there was very strict crowd controls. So eventually the police stopped the crowds joining the route, or, you know, to avoid any crush or anything. But it was a really overwhelmingly positive day. You know, it started raining, but even despite that, I think everyone enjoyed it, and I think probably King Charles and Queen Camilla not only will have been relieved, but also perhaps a bit surprised at how much enthusiasm there actually was on the day.
I remember specifically Charles looking really deeply moved by the affection from the crowds, actually. I think that really struck me. But Rebecca, what about you? You were in the Abbey. What were your favourite memories of the day?
And I'll just say on that, you are so right, Joe, because I don't think people sometimes realise what an emotional man he is, and he is, and I know it meant a lot to him. I think for me, the highlight of being in the Abbey, on a serious note, was the music. It was, I mean, I'm sure it was wonderful when you were watching it on television, but trust me, to be there with the acoustics in the Abbey with that incredibly high vaulted ceiling, it was spine-tinglingly beautiful, and you knew that the King had put so much effort because he is such an aficionado of choosing into the music that he chose. And I also loved seeing Charlotte and Louis spot Prince George as one of the pages of honour, and they just did what every sibling would do, be like, oh, you know, it's our brother there. And I thought that was lovely. And then I think I remember telling you guys after I'd come back from it at the time, the funniest moment was Ant and Dec. They were the second stars of the show, the television presenters, because they got a huge round of applause from the crowd as they came in, because they're obviously very recognisable faces in the UK. Probably royalty of British TV, aren't they? Also, this was the big thing, do you remember at the time, is when we were going to be able to go to the toilet because we were all in the Abbey.
Well, it was a big thing for you, we should say.
Well, she'd been on her feet for a very long time.
We were all in the Abbey for hours, and of course when you know you can't go to the toilet, it's all you think about. And everyone was having to grab their moments to go and do a kind of loo dash. And so when Ant and Dec went to the toilet, everyone started cheering and clapping, and they were really embarrassed, and they were kind of doing a bit of a walk of shame and coming back. So, you know, what I loved is that there was the pomp and the ceremony and the pageantry, but I think I wrote, there was a bit of an air of a country wedding about it, where all of the favourite people were together and they were also going to enjoy it as well. I thought that was lovely.
Can I tell you a fun fact? I was in a celebrity pub quiz for charity earlier this month with the Duchess of York, and she didn't know the date of the coronation, but I did.
Oh, well done.
Well done, Joe. Did you get the bonus points?
It's your job. It's your job.
Exactly. Thought that was really funny.
And she wasn't invited, was she? So.
Anyway, moving on, Richard. We've discussed the highs, but one of the things that made everyone feel rather uneasy about the day and the coronation was the will they, won't they discussion that is always inevitably around the Sussexes and their attendance at the event.
Well, this had been heightened, you might remember, in the build-up to the coronation, because Prince Harry was promoting his memoirs, Spare. And he kept giving a series of interviews, TV interviews, and each one he would talk about his sort of demands for things that would have to be met before he would go to the coronation. He would say, oh, we want an apology over this, or we want to have sit-down discussions over this, and it just became quite embarrassing, the whole thing. But soon it became evident that none of that had happened. He hadn't got any of the things that he'd asked for, yet he still did come. So that did say a lot about the reaction that he hoped to get and what he actually achieved.
And in the end, Rebecca, his appearance was actually low-key, but everything from his arrival to his body language really spoke volumes, didn't it?
It did feel like he'd kind of slunk in and then slunk back out again.
Yeah.
I mean, he was back out of the country, you know, before the day's events had finished. Probably for the best, I think. And I think maybe a little bit of credit to him for doing that, for coming, showing his face, and then leaving. But you're right, there was, and I know the palace found it very frustrating, the whole will he, won't he, in the run-up to it, because they just wanted to focus on delivering the most enjoyable day possible, for not just the King and the royal family, but for, you know, everyone lives in the UK and the Commonwealth and that wanted to tune in and watch it around the world. Do you remember there was that particularly, I have to say, really quite glorious moment when Harry took his place in the Abbey and he was behind Princess Anne's massive plume.
Yes, a lot of people saw conspiracy there.
Yeah, I mean there wasn't, but my God, it was funny. Yeah, so it didn't even fail. He delivered even on the day unintentionally, but I think he did the right thing in just going in, coming quietly, you know, trying to show his support. A lot of people will think that was slightly ironic in the circumstances, and then leaving. It was probably the right thing to do.
Well, yes, but his early departure, Richard, after the coronation, did seem to set the tone for the distance that Harry has kept from his family this whole year.
Yes, it did, but I'm afraid I take a slightly more cynical view of his attendance at the coronation from Rebecca. I think, you know, he'd made those public demands for what he wanted before he would attend. He wanted these apologies and so forth. Didn't get any of them. But I think he attended because he wanted to keep up that link. Because when we're talking about the commercial value of Harry and Meghan, you know, it depends on that royal connection. And it wouldn't have been good for him not even to have attended the coronation of his father. So I think there was that. And in terms of rushing off, you know, it just felt kind of a bit bad-tempered. It was strange. I mean, remember that the coronation service, you know, beautiful service, but it was only part of the celebrations of that weekend. The next day we had the spectacular concert at Windsor Castle, which one of the highlights of that concert was their Montecito neighbour, Katy Perry. But no, Harry didn't bother to stay for that, even though later in the year he and Meghan travelled by private jet to watch Katy Perry perform at Las Vegas. So it was, I thought it was all rather strange.
Well, but, you know, to Rebecca's earlier point about him not wanting to make a fuss, maybe he would have, if he'd stayed, he would have been accused of sucking all the attention.
Yes, and how welcome would he have been?
Yeah, I mean, they had a lunch at Buckingham Palace afterwards. Can you imagine how awkward it would have been if he'd gone to that? And no one would have been able to feel they could talk comfortably. You know, half the table weren't even talking to him, full stop. So I think it was the right thing to do, was to not hang about, I have to say.
Well, anyway, we'll have more from our brilliant panel in just a moment, including on the ongoing fallout to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's media activities. But first, a few beautiful pictures of this year. This is part one of our Royal Montage 2023. Some amazing images there. Stick with us for part two a little later in the show. Before that, though, a look at the year's lows. Rebecca, as with the highs, there's only one place to start, and that is with the much anticipated and in some circles much feared arrival of Prince Harry's book, Spare. It's safe to say we're still feeling some of the reverberations to this day.
I remember someone saying to me Christmas before this, this time last year, maybe it won't be as bad as everyone thinks it will be, and I actually think it was worse, because it was so nasty, so poisonous, so vitriolic, so unnecessarily spiteful. Obviously there were kind of eye-catching moments in it, in terms of the row between him and Prince William, which ended up him
with the broken necklace
and the dog bowl, which is now kind of gone down in the annals of royal history. Him going into the fallout between Meghan and Kate over bridesmaids' dresses, in which he gave details of private conversations, of text messages, of phone calls between them, and just the constant needling of his elder brother. And that's something that someone very well connected said to me. We all thought maybe it would be the King and the Queen who were the villains of the piece, but actually the villain of Harry's piece turns out to be his elder brother. The man that he shared so much, the most unimaginable family tragedy with. They have such a unique shared experience that nobody else in the royal family, quite frankly, can understand. They lived together, they did everything together. So to see that explode once and for all, so nastily, was actually really sad to see. And as you rightly say, we're still seeing the fallout from this day. William has not spoken to his brother in a very, very long time, and people I know who are well plumbed into the situation say that they can't see that changing in a very long time.
Wow. Yeah, Richard, you said at the time that you thought Prince Harry was out to destroy the monarchy. Is that still your view?
Very much so, yes. I think from the moment they quit royal duties and what followed, I think it became clear that their motive was to damage the monarchy as much as possible, damage his brother as much as possible. We saw that from the Oprah Winfrey interview. They really were, and we've still seen the repercussions of that later in the year. And that followed through from his book. And I think, following on from what Rebecca said, what was so damaging about the book as well was, it was so well written. It was so unprecedented. We'd never had a book like this to hear in the words of a senior member of the royal family. And, let's be clear, Harry did not write it. what Harry did was record hours of interviews, being interviewed by a very skilled ghostwriter who then wrote this beautifully written book to be as damaging as possible. And I think that's part of what did it. Obviously, it sold very well in the way that any book by a senior member of the royal family would sell well, but it did do terrible damage.
Well,
yes.
Including ruining Elizabeth Arden 8-hour cream for me forevermore, if
yes.
anyone remembers that story.
Let's
but
not go there.
Well, it wasn't just the book, it was the series of interviews that caused so many problems. Isn't that right, Rebecca?
Yes, where he really drove home this unprecedented level of animosity towards his own family. The book was bad enough, but he didn't hold back in those interviews either. I mean, he's very vitriolic about the press. We're used to that. That comes with the territory. But I just think and this I don't think has done himself any favours here. What really shocked people is, we're all part of big families. Some siblings get on better with others at some point. Things that will rub you up the wrong way, but you don't go and shame your family like that. And I think that's what's left such a nasty taste in people's mouths, that they understand that he hasn't had the perfect childhood, but it's left people feeling really uncomfortable at the level of disloyalty he's shown to his family and the way he seemed to want to traduce them in public. I don't think he's done himself any favours with that.
What I was shocked at was his assertion that his sole reason for existence was in case William needed a kidney or something one day, the spare. I just can't imagine Diana thinking that that's why she had Harry. Do you know what I mean?
I know, it's so belittling of his own parents. He was a much wanted and, like pretty much most people, much longed for child. I mean, slightly joking, I remember when the book was coming out, having messages from my own sister. I'm kind of one of quite a large, group of siblings, and we put quite a funny spin on it, and I was getting messages from my sisters going, yes, and you always got the biggest room. I'm the oldest, it may not surprise you to know. You got the biggest room, and I remember when we all had to have a bath, you always had the good end. I used to have the end with the tap. So I remember messaging one of my sisters going, well, that can be a chapter for your next book.
Exactly, we can all hold those grudges.
We were laughing about it, but to have that sort of granular family irritations aired in public just seems utterly pointless and a bit pathetic.
Well, and Richard, away from the more damaging allegations though, is it fair to say that some of the insights in the book will actually be useful for historians?
I think very much so. As I said, there's never been a book like it written by someone so senior, and to get that, I think for me the sort of account of what it's like to be staying at Balmoral and all the details vividly captured is very interesting. The problem for historians will be that here you've got this on record and it's just one side of the story. That's what's so grossly unfair about the book, that I think he went out, for example, he thought that, yes, my sister-in-law Catherine has a great image. How can I damage her? So it went through their intimate conversations and portrayed them all in a terribly negative light. And obviously she hasn't responded. Catherine has only ever given one interview. That was the engagement interview. She will never respond to this, I'm sure. And so then in the future you're left with this. So yeah, that's part of its gross unfairness.
I still don't have the answer to this. What did he hope to achieve by this? And I still don't have the answer. Why do it? And what did you think the end result would be? Did you think it would suddenly, everyone in your family would come together and all give a group hug and, suddenly start playing Happy Families? I don't see what
I think he thought it would launch his the next phase of his career as a media personality. I think.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And I think also certainly what his friend says, he wanted to get it off his chest, basically. So, but that's what's so pathetic. There's lots of things that you might hold a grudge about, the size of your bedroom when you're a child or something. But to put that all in a book,
there was the great Easter egg crime of 1986.
To put it all out there. It's just pathetic.
Not that it still rankles.
Well, you know, we're grown-ups. Look, I'm sure by the end of this Christmas holiday, there'll be lots of people that will be having rows or resentments with their family or whatever. But don't put it in a book. You know, it doesn't do any good for anyone.
I can't promise I won't write about that Easter egg incident one day.
They did a documentary when Queen Camilla guest edited Country Life magazine, and there was a hilarious moment. It wasn't, God, this year's gone so quickly, I can't remember if it was this year or last year, but there was a hilarious moment where they went back to their grandparents, her and her sister's they went back to their grandparents' home, and Camilla admitted burying her sister Annabelle's best teddy in the garden. It was called Tiddy Bar or something.
That is cruel.
It was called what?
Burying it in the garden, and like her sister joking, saying, "I've never, forgiven her for that," and you know, it still rankles to this day.
What was it called?
Tiddy Bar, apparently, was their teddy. But what I'm saying is,
there's a new meme coming to you any day now.
This kind of stuff happens in families, whether you're the royal family or, you know, a very ordinary family like the ones we come from. But we just, you don't air that dirty laundry in public.
Rebecca, there were more lows for Harry and Meghan to come as they were evicted from their Frogmore cottage. And this wasn't a total surprise, but some wondered if it would ever come to pass.
Well, actually, I do think it was a bit of a surprise, and I think it showed a new direction by the King and his senior aides, because obviously Harry and Meghan, one of the things that particularly Harry did was made a great virtue of, was saying, one of the things he feels has always thrown at him is that the amount of public money effectively that got spent on Frogmore Cottage, creating this new family home for them, which they've, you know, barely lived in, quite frankly. And so, look, we're going to make a great show of paying this all back, therefore you've not got to stick to beat us with over this, which actually probably was a very sensible move. But obviously it meant that they could also live there for a number of years, because they'd effectively paid their rent in advance. But obviously the King suddenly turned around and said, actually, do you know what, enough is enough. We can't have this home, this big property on the royal land, lying empty for months, if not years, without anyone living in it. We just can't justify that. So, you know, the eviction notice is on the door. And Harry has effectively admitted later that did come as a huge surprise to them. So I think it showed a level of decisiveness on behalf of the King that people didn't expect.
Yeah. And Richard, that limbo of Harry, that as a Councillor of State without a home, has lingered over them ever since, hasn't it?
Well, I think it's an example of how some of the advice that King Charles has been given during his first year on the throne has not been very wise. Because yes, he may have been told this will make you look decisive by kicking them out of Frogmore Cottage, fine, but they didn't think through the consequences. Now what those consequences were was that he remains as a Councillor of State, someone who can stand in for the King if needed. And to address that, what King Charles did was he extended the numbers of Councillors of State to include Prince Edward and Princess Anne. And that was clearly because he worried about causing more problems with Harry and, you know, hurting his feelings. But what that did was he remains a Councillor of State. Well, to have that, people have since pointed out, you have to have a British base. You have to have some residence in this country. Now that creates a problem because, sure, they booted them out of Frogmore Cottage. Well, what are you going to do now? And so now we're in the ludicrous situation where the King's thinking, do I have to give them a home again? Can I give them a residence somewhere else? And he's created a dilemma for himself.
What about a nice room in Buckingham Palace? A little bedsit?
Possibly, or maybe, you know, Prince Andrew, he could join Prince Andrew at Royal Lodge.
Well, apparently that's huge, that place.
Massive, yeah.
Rebecca, sort of fresher history now, a little more recent news. In many ways, we're still processing the fallout from Omid Scobie's book, Endgame. Is it fair to say that it's set back any hopes of reconciliation even further?
I think that gives too much credit to the book, to be honest, to say that it's set back hopes, but it's raised uncomfortable situations that the family were really hopeful, and I mean, I include Harry and Meghan in that, were really hopeful of trying to bury. I remember after the kind of whole furore around Spare, you know, before that, the Netflix documentary, all of the interviews, one member of their team, not to me, but briefing very grandly that this is the end of their look-back projects. Part of me thought, who gives you the right to say this is our programme of look-back projects?
We're entering a new era.
Yeah, but that's what they said. We're entering this new era, and we're now focusing on our future and obviously our own self-generated stuff rather than stuff about the royal family. And I mean, we have seen that kind of accord break down here and there, but they've largely, well, they haven't done any royal family related projects, and I get the impression they were really hoping to start to move forwards, slightly naively I think, but they were hoping to do that. And obviously the Scobie book then blew that all up and brought back a lot of what we've been discussing about at the beginning of the year. So the trouble is, I think it's laid this uncomfortable situation again out for public scrutiny. The issue of trust has come up again because somebody has been speaking, or people have been speaking to Omid Scobie, and I can tell you now, those are not people at Buckingham Palace. So who is? And the whole issue of trust comes up again. So it does put them in a very difficult situation.
Yes, and Richard, one media expert, Mark Bukowski, said he believed the book had backfired on the Sussexes. Is that fair?
I think it's backfired spectacularly, yes. I mean, from the start, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been keen to make clear through their spokesman that they didn't cooperate with this book, and with good reason. Because remember, when they gave that Oprah Winfrey interview, you know, pushing out the racism allegations which so shocked Oprah in the interview, you know, they're putting it out there, and it sort of lingered. That smell has always just lingered ever since over the royal family. And I think also it was seen as a sort of weapon. It was something maybe they could deploy in the future. You know, imagine how much damage they could do if they, you know, named those royal racists, as they said. Well, now we've had Omid Scobie's book has come out, and by accident, you know, he insists with this Dutch edition, they named these two as King Charles and Catherine. And this explosion has turned out to be a real damp squib, you know, I would say, because it's lots of people just don't believe it. People like me, frankly, don't believe there was any sort of racism that went on, particularly from Catherine. And there was no context, or there was no more detail. So yes, it's damaging. People who don't like the royal family maybe like them even less, but most people, I think what a load of nonsense, and that they blame the Sussexes even more.
Do you think that that whole issue puts pressure on the Sussexes to clarify the issue?
Oh, I think it does massively. Yeah, they've got to. You know, remember that they're hoping to do all these commercial deals, this type of thing. Well, it doesn't look good that you tarnish your own family in this way. I mean, you know, come out and give some context. But the fact that they haven't, and it wasn't in Harry's book Spare, he didn't mention the claims again in interviews, or it wasn't in the Netflix series. So for that reason, I think he does feel slightly ashamed or embarrassed, awkward about it in the first place, because maybe he knows there wasn't much to it.
Yeah.
So I think it really has backfired on them.
Well, Rebecca, you could argue that for the royals, the problem of Prince Andrew has been, you know, relatively minor compared to Harry, and there's been no books from Andrew, there's been no more interviews, but there is also the little issue of that big royal lodge.
And I think there may have been no books and no interviews. In fact, I think Andrew's team have made a point of knocking down suggestions he may be considering writing one of his own.
Chaining him to a radiator.
But the trouble is there's no clarity either. He's still wafting around that great big 10-bedroomed, you know, White Elephant style mansion with his ex-wife, the Duchess of York. It's just the two of them living in there. It just doesn't seem very tenable in this day and age. What's he going to do with his life? I mean, you know, we hear vague talk that he'd like to start giving back in a charitable or public sense in one way. There's some talk that he's still clinging on to the idea that he can resurrect, a public life again. But I can't see that, and certainly people I've spoken to have made clear while the king, you know, he's still his brother and he is still loyal to him in that respect. The idea of Andrew ever coming back on the books of the public, of the royal family, a pie in the sky, that will never ever happen. But there's an unsatisfactory situation there. What's he going to do with the rest of his life?
That's the thing. I mean, Richard, he wants to clear his name, doesn't he? He wants to return to royal life.
He does. The problem Andrew has is that he agreed this settlement with the woman who'd accused him of sexual assault. He agreed to that settlement. Yes, he didn't accept any guilt or anything like that. And I think he did that for the best of motives, because he knew that that would overshadow his mother's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. I think he was pressured to accept that settlement and probably regrets it now. But it does mean that it's very difficult to bring him back. But, to Andrew's credit, he's never given an interview, he's never written a book, attacking his own family in the way that Harry has. So he hasn't been disloyal in that sense, which I'm sure the King appreciates. But I think for the sake of the royal family and the monarchy generally, no one wants to give him a role again.
Can I tell you one of my favourite moments from our very royal year? Rebecca, it probably wasn't one of your favourites, but it did amuse me when...
You're starting to worry me, Jo.
Just remind us of your encounter with Prince William. You're barefoot and a bag of frozen peas.
Oh God, yeah, that was so funny. I was literally racing out to go to cover a job that Prince William was on. He was visiting a building site in West London. And I don't think I ever admitted this, but I'll admit this now. I broke my toe, and actually how I did it was I accidentally kicked a piece of gym equipment I'd bought in January, meaning to try and lose weight and get fit, and then never used. So maybe actually this January I'll have to start that New Year's resolution, but it had been lying in our hallway and I kicked it barefoot on the way. Broke my toe.
A damn painful
but
thing to do.
Very, very stoically, I crammed my foot into a pair of trainers, went to the job, but by the time I got to this building site, their health and safety people took one look at me kind of limping along and said, there's no way you're going to be allowed on this site. But I insisted, I've got to cover this job. The world needs to know what Prince William's doing. So they found me a bag of, actually frozen spinach it was, not peas, which I was very impressed that it was spinach on the building site.
But I do seem to recall it was Waitrose, which is very fitting.
Yeah, and it was spinach, not peas. I remember joking with them, and they said, "We even get requests for green tea here, not builders' tea. We are a better class of building
Well, I think,
sites."
come on, the moral of the story here is avoid exercise equipment at all costs.
Absolutely.
It's bad for your health.
That should be our New Year's resolution.
William was quite funny though, because when he spotted me there with this kind of tea towel and these frozen peas on my foot, he was laughing, and he did say, "Someone should get a picture of this because this is hilarious." It's like, right now, you are at my mercy. I'm going to talk to you about Earthshot, all these sorts of things, because there's no way you can run off and not listen.
Oh, bless him.
Yeah, to be fair, it was a very funny moment. Probably not one of the highlights of my career.
You're a right royal foot soldier.
Yeah.
I'm going to say
very
that.
good, Jo.
Anyway, time now for more of the best photographs of the royal family from 2023. Here's part 2 of our fantastic montage. Some wonderful images there of some of the incredible occasions that 2023 has produced, and that Rebecca English has been to most of them, I bet.
And it feels like it, I have to say.
You're ready for a holiday.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we look forward to seeing what 2024 brings, and we can't wait to share all of the events with you. A reminder to like this show and press the subscribe button to the Daily Mail Royals channel so you can be with us at every step of the way. Just time now to thank my guests, Rebecca and Richard, and to all of those of you who have joined us this year, both on the panel and at home. A hugely, very happy Christmas to you all, and a happy new year. We'll see you next year. Bye-bye.